In front of a dilapidated old mansion, there stood a little girl in a yellow dress, her eyes intensely fixed on the house without moving an inch. Then, two boys arrived and even made insulting gestures toward the little girl. Seeing the boys about to enter the mansion,
"You are going to die in there."
Adelaide issued a kind-hearted warning. The boys were enraged and began cursing at Adelaide. Then, they turned and entered the mansion, recklessly destroying everything in sight, inadvertently awakening something unclean. Strange occurrences began to happen very quickly. A dead wild boar suddenly appeared, but it looked as though it had only recently died. The boys didn't sense anything amiss and instead thought it was amusing. A wooden door slowly opened, and they went to the basement to investigate, only to find many strange limb specimens there. Troy casually smashed the specimens, and instantly, a foul stench filled the air. They didn't notice a sinister figure flash past behind them. The two decided to leave this place. As expected, if you expect nothing to go wrong, something certainly will. Troy, who had broken the specimen, suddenly disappeared, and despite Brian's cries there was no response. With his good friend suddenly gone, Brian had no choice but to return to the basement to search. Then, suddenly, a monstrous creature with a ferocious face appeared. Time flew by, and 20 years later, the once dilapidated mansion had been completely transformed. Ben's family planned to move into this renovated mansion. The reason was simple: the price was incredibly low, only 1/3 of the normal price. The landlord, Marcy, didn't hide any truths from Ben's family. She told them that the previous owners were a male couple who died here shortly after renovating the house. This was also the reason why the house was so cheap. Violet, in the midst of her rebellious years, immediately agreed to buy the house upon hearing that people had died there. That evening, Ben wanted to celebrate their move-in with his wife, Vivien, but she sternly refused. It turned out that just 2 days earlier, Vivien had lost their child in the hospital, and upon returning home, she heard a series of eerie sounds. Vivien first called for emergency help, then grabbed a knife from the table and went upstairs, where she soon heard noises that made her blush. Vivien opens the bathroom door to find Ben cheating on his student. Ben feels guilty about this and decides to take his wife and daughter away from this sad place. On the second day, while Vivien was cleaning the house, the now grown-up Adelaide appeared again. At that moment, Adelaide's mother, Constance, came over and expressed her apologies to Vivien. Constance said she was a devout believer and that it was an accident that led her to give birth to Adelaide, the deformed child. Vivien was puzzled. As Constance left, she gave Vivien a beautiful gift and offered to help her rid the room of evil spirits. Vivien was completely baffled. She had no idea what Constance meant by evil spirits. After lighting the sage that Constance had given her, Vivien went from room to room searching for evil spirits. Suddenly, a pole ring appeared, but when Vivien climbed up to the roof, she found it pitch black. Hearing the shouts, Ben and Violet hurried over. They discovered a set of black rubber suits hidden there. They guessed these must have belonged to the previous homeowners, as male couples are not uncommon in America. Ben looked thoughtfully at the rubber suit and then threw it into the trash can outside the door. In the deep of the night, Ben suddenly woke up as if a demonic voice was controlling his actions. He went to the furnace and ignited it with a burst of flames.
What are you doing?
Am I in a dream?
The next day Vivien was drying the sheets when a mysterious woman came to visit. She said her name was Moira and that she was the caretaker of this old mansion, offering her services for free. Hearing about the free service, Vivien became interested and invited Moira over to her house for a small gathering. Moira said she had been the caretaker here for many years, and even though the owners had changed several times, she had not left. Just then, Ben hurried home, but the Moira he saw was different from the Moira Vivien saw. Seeing that her goal had been achieved, Moira said she would come to clean every Thursday, then turned and left. Vivien didn't notice anything odd about Ben, because she didn't know that the Moira in Ben's eyes was a young woman. A few days later, Ben heard strange noises coming from the next room. He opened the door, following the sound. Ben looked out the window and saw a man with scars on his face standing below. While Vivien was applying skincare to her thighs, a rubber man suddenly appeared at the door. Vivien thought the rubber man in front of her was her husband, Ben, and she was about to engage in some joyful activities with him. However, the real Ben was sleepwalking in the kitchen. He turned on all the gas and then placed his hand over it. At the crucial moment, Constance appeared just in time and said that it wasn't his turn yet, and Ben, as if possessed, couldn't say a word. He slowly returned to his room, and Vivien, not noticing anything unusual, said something very strange.
I love you.
I love you.
The next day, while Ben was in the castle, he felt someone was following him. so he intentionally ran towards the deserted outskirts. As the person behind him got closer, Ben took the opportunity to hide and grab the man. He discovered that the man following him was Larry, who was warning him that his family was in danger. Larry said that 70% of his body was burned, and if Ben didn't hurry to get his family out of the old mansion, they would all die tragically. Ben was puzzled. He didn't understand why Larry would curse his family to die. Out of necessity, Larry revealed that he had severe, terminal brain cancer and was beyond help. He had lived in that old mansion for half a year and then started experiencing auditory hallucinations, with a strange voice constantly urging him to kill his wife and daughter. Unable to resist the voice's temptation, he spread a large amount of gasoline throughout the room and then ended his family with a massive fire. Although he survived the fire, the deaths of his wife and daughter would become the nightmare of his life. Seeing Larry's increasingly absurd statements, Ben became very emotional, because Larry said he would sleepwalk, which is exactly what he was experiencing. Ben left in anger, but Larry showed a sinister smile. On the other side, Constance sneaked into the old mansion trying to try on Vivien's earrings but was caught by Moira. But Constance was not panicked at all. She even blamed Moira for meddling, and Moira didn't dare say a word to Constance. Could it be that Moira is not human? Why would Constance say to kill her again? Vivien had just returned home when she encountered another paranormal event.
What are you doing? Why are you in my house?
An exasperated Vivien shouted at Constance, wanting an explanation, but Constance simply stated that this was all normal operation. The old mansion was like their backyard. Adelaide said she was innocent, and it was all the work of the twins. Vivien was completely baffled because she didn't know any twins, and as Constance led Adelaide away, she said something meaningful.
You touch my kid one more time and I will break your goddamn arm.
Today was Violet's first day transferring schools, but before she could step into the campus, she was blocked by Leah at the door. Of course, Violet was not afraid of Leah in the slightest, and they inevitably clashed. At the same time, Violet also made her only friend at school, Tate, who was a mental patient with delusional disorder, and Ben is a professional psychiatrist. And because the mansion was spacious enough, Ben turned one of the rooms into his office. Tate was the first patient Ben received. He said that he had often experienced hallucinations in the past 2 years. Attending a sacred and inviolable holy war, he knew he was on a mission for 900 million girls and that no one could stop him because he was going to rule the earth as the supreme being. Ben was at a loss for words. The next day, Tate sneaked into the old house to have a date with Violet. Just then, Ben suddenly burst into the room, knowing Tate was very dangerous, so he urged Violet to stay away from Tate. Not long after, Moira came to the study to clean, but in Ben's eyes, Moira had turned into a young girl in a maid's outfit, and Ben completely lost it and wanted to discuss the philosophy of life with Moira. Just then, Violet opened the door, furious. Violet went to the school and then found Leah to make a deal, saying she had something at home that Leah needed. Leah didn't suspect anything. She didn't believe Violet could pose any threat to her. Later, they came to the basement of the old house, where Leah found Tate sitting right in the center of the basement. Tate was struggling like a madman, and terrifying scenes kept coming, completely breaking Leah. But 7 years ago, this place was a dormitory of a nursing school. That night, several students planned to go watch the Doors perform, leaving only 2 girls behind. Not long after the students left, a rapid knocking sound kept coming. Maria opened the door and saw a man with a bleeding head, who said he had hurt his head and hoped to get help from the angels. As a medic, Maria did not refuse the injured man. As Maria was bandaging the man's head, he saw the cross necklace on Maria's body and then asked if she would be redeemed. However, Maria soon realized that she couldn't find any wound on the man's head. He was as if he hadn't been injured at all. Before Maria could react, the man attacked her. Gladys was terrified and turned to run away. Maria wakes up and sees the man standing in front of her. The man wanted Maria to change into a new uniform, and Maria, terrified, had no choice but to comply with the man's arrangement. Then Maria was placed in a strange position. Maria was tightly bound, and she kept reciting the Bible, praying that she could be redeemed. Seeing that Maria seemed no longer to resist, the man turned and left. Maria thought her prayers had taken effect, but then the man suddenly appeared and mercilessly stabbed her several times in the back. After Maria died, this old house also became a haunted house. Back to the present, in the basement of the old house, Leah, frightened by Tate, had renounced her evil ways, saying she had never seen such a terrifying demon. She hadn't slept for 3 days. and even her hair had turned white due to fear. Violet was having a sweet dream, but suddenly Tate appeared by her bed. Just then, the alarm went off, awakening Ben and his wife. Ben hurried downstairs to check the situation, accompanied by bursts of eerie laughter. Ben was like a frightened little bird. Upon reaching the basement, Ben discovered that Adelaide had sneaked in again, leaving him utterly devastated inside. They began to doubt the safety of the house more and more. Vivien said she was physically and mentally exhausted since her last encounter with Rubberman, where they discussed major life events. She has become pregnant again, but strangely, she had no signs of pregnancy for 2 consecutive months, which was completely illogical. Vivien suspected there was something wrong with the child. Ben reassured Vivien that this child was the reason they had moved here. The next day, Ben received news that his lover, Hayden, was also pregnant, and he could only lie to Vivien, saying a former patient needed help and he would not be home for the next couple of days. In reality, he was going to accompany Hayden for an abortion. The unsuspecting Vivien was obviously deceived by Ben again. Meanwhile, Constance was making dessert for after dinner, even asking Adelaide to spit in it to enhance the flavor. Then Constance brought the freshly made dessert to Vivien. Constance said she had made it herself as compensation for Adelaide disturbing their rest. Vivien was very happy. Constance mentioned she could smell the scent of new life, which was as enticing as the dessert. They had a brief conversation. It turned out that Constance had other children, but her children either died prematurely or were ill. As she left, Constance reassured Vivien that her child would be fine, saying there was nothing more beautiful than the anticipation of new life. Then Vivien took the dessert made by Constance to Violet and confessed truthfully about her new pregnancy. Violet did not express dissatisfaction. She thought her mother was too weak. Meanwhile, Ben had already arrived at Hayden's home. While Ben was secretly dating Hayden, his wife and daughter were being attacked at home. 3 masked individuals had them tightly bound. After removing their hoods, they found that the attackers were 3 young people seeking thrills. At that moment, one of the girls pulled out a surprise. It was clear that these 3 young people were insane. They wanted to mimic the nurse murder case from the old school hospital dormitory years ago. They demanded that Violet change into a specific outfit, but as soon as Violet stood up, she broke free from their grasp and ran straight for the door. Just then, Tate suddenly appeared inside the old house. He told Violet to just lure these bad guys to the basement. Then Fiona, who was chasing from behind, caught Violet. Fiona took Violet to the bathroom and asked her to change into the outfit she had prepared. Bianca casually picked up the dessert made by Constance, but after just a couple of bites, she felt sick to her stomach and wanted to go to the bathroom. Violet tried to escape, but Fiona blocked her with a small knife. Fiona began to describe to Violet the process of her forthcoming crime. She would submerge Violet in water for 3 minutes, causing Violet's brain to die from lack of oxygen. Hearing this, Violet suddenly became very happy, and then she told Fiona about the bathtub in the basement. Violet said the bathtub's faucet in the basement was made of titanium alloy, much stronger than the broken faucet here. Meanwhile, Vivien was tied to a chair by Dallas and could not move. She didn't know what Dallas was going to do to her. At this crucial moment, Vivien saw Adelaide standing not far away watching. Vivien told Dallas that he definitely couldn't kill her tonight because someone would come to stop him. Dallas thought Vivien was crazy, so he cut the straps binding her and demanded she change into the specific outfit quickly. But Vivien was not a weak woman. She stunned Dallas with a surprise attack. Meanwhile, Violet successfully lured Fiona to the basement. Fiona was completely shocked by the scene before her. She never imagined that there was a boy hiding in this old house. When Bianca went back to find her partners, she saw a strange figure flash by, and her partners had also disappeared. In just a few seconds, Bianca was chopped in half at the waist. Meanwhile, Violet lured Fiona to the basement and took the opportunity to escape. But Fiona didn't know this was a haunted house. After Fiona looked towards the bathtub, she saw a white figure inside. When Adelaide discovered Vivien was in danger, she immediately ran back to their residence to find Constance. But Constance didn't believe Adelaide, so she locked her in a room surrounded by mirrors. At this time, Vivien and Violet had both escaped from danger, and after meeting up, they hurriedly ran towards the door. Their cries caught Constance's attention. Meanwhile, Dallas also saw a figure in white passing by, so he followed it down to the basement. He was about to break down, and then an even more devastating scene occurred. He saw Fiona, who had already been killed, and the white nurse who had died 30 years ago. Ben, who was out of town, was accompanying Hayden for an abortion and had no idea what was happening at home with his wife and daughter. It was only when Ben saw 100 missed calls from his wife on his phone that he realized something serious had happened. The scene shifts to Constance slowly walking into the old house's basement, where she stands with Tate and Moira. Dallas had also met a gruesome end. It seems that Tate is not an ordinary person. Perhaps none of the three are human anymore. Tate didn't want Ben's family to know the truth, so they had to destroy the evidence. Moira said she would go get a shovel, and then asked Tate to bring bleach, so they could turn the bodies to ash. The next day, Ben had returned home, and when questioned by the police, he said he was visiting a patient, which is why he couldn't get back in time. Then the police showed Ben a photo of a girl, Bianca, whom he had once diagnosed. The police said they found Bianca 6 blocks away with her waist almost chopped into 8 pieces. According to their investigation, these kids even formed a club intending to recreate various heinous murders. Then the 2 officers turned and left. Violet was very disappointed in her father's actions, although she didn't know how Tate had managed to sneak into the house. It no longer mattered. The greatest fortune was that Violet was unharmed. Vivien's heart was dead. She no longer saw this as their home and decided to sell the old house. Subsequently, Vivien found Marcy and recounted all the bizarre events that had happened recently. She believed that Marcy had deceived her family. Marcy hadn't clarified everything about the house, and if she had known about all the murders that occurred here, she would never have bought it. On the other side, Moira appeared again in front of Ben, and in Ben's eyes, Moira turned into a young girl in a maid's outfit. In Constance's view, however, Moira was still an elderly woman. Every time they met, they bickered like enemies. Constance said seeing Moira was like torture. What exactly had happened between them? It turns out that 30 years ago, Constance's family also lived in this old house, and Moira was shot dead by her. The husband tried to cover it up, but Constance was no ordinary person. She raised her hand and shot her husband dead with another bullet. Moira, killed by Constance, became an evil spirit, doomed to never leave the old house. Time returns to the present. Ben looked dazed with his hands covered in blood. When he got home, he found Moira cleaning the blood off the floor. Moira said she hadn't seen anything and told Ben not to worry. He could confidently receive the next victim. It turns out that Ben had just received a patient. The patient, Sally, said she was going to get divorced next week, ending a 23-year marriage effort, which deeply depressed her. She didn't know if she would ever find love or be loved again. The more Sally spoke, the more agitated she became, making Ben's mental state increasingly bewildered, leading him to kill his own patient. After Moira finished cleaning the blood from the floor, she didn't leave but continued to seduce Ben. Just then, Vivien came home and sensed that they were not on good terms, so she called them together to clear up the misunderstanding. Ben completely lost it. He said Moira made strange gestures every day to seduce him, but he had firmly refused. However, in Vivien's eyes, Moira was an old woman in her 80s. How could she possibly be seducing her husband? Seeing Moira's emotional state, Vivien didn't say another word. She also thought it was all Ben's fault. The recent bizarre events were overwhelming Vivien. The next day, Vivien joined a local tour group, hoping to use the opportunity to forget all her troubles. However, through the guide's introduction, Vivien also learned about the history of the haunted house. It turns out that this old house was built in 1992 by a surgeon named Charles for his socialite wife. But just a few days after they moved in, Charles unexpectedly contracted a virus, and his mind even developed a horrifying Frankenstein complex, leading him to conduct many strange experiments in the basement. Charles's research results were those bizarre organs and limbs. He combined different animal organs trying to create an entirely new species, but reliable scientific research required a large amount of funding, which he could not afford. Nora was very dissatisfied with this life. She believed that her husband had destroyed their home with his own hands, and she demanded that Charles provide her with $100 a month in spending money, no matter what means he used. The next day, a woman who wanted an abortion in secret came to the basement of the old house. The cost of the operation was $60, and Dorothy readily paid it. Then Nora gave Dorothy a cup of herbal soup, saying that drinking it would make her forget all the unhappiness. Charles's years of performing abortions for girls led to a heavy resentment in the old house. There were 24 girls who became the souls under Charles's scalpel. Time returns to the present, and the tour guide continues to narrate the history of the haunted house. At this moment, Vivien suddenly had a lot of blood on her leg, which frightened her so much that she got off the bus and ran straight home. Ben hurriedly took Vivien to the hospital, where the examination results were perfect. The doctor said their child was very healthy and that Vivien's sudden bleeding was just a normal occurrence, advising her not to worry too much. Vivien thought that perhaps the recent issues with the house had made her emotionally unstable. They were already preparing to move. As soon as she finished speaking, Ben fainted to the ground. When Ben woke up, he found himself holding a shovel and lying in the backyard. When he stood up, he saw his hands were covered in blood. Ben didn't know what had happened. He had just returned home when the doctor called to say his blood test results were out. One of the results showed his blood contained a large amount of opium tincture, a drug that can anesthetize the nerves, and if used excessively, it could lead to severe memory degradation. But this drug had been banned decades ago. Ben suspected that Moira had drugged his coffee, but Moira boldly stated a sentence.
Prove it.
Meanwhile, Vivien was in the process of selling the house when the doorbell rang again. Outside was a woman who said she was here to see the house. Recalling the attack she had experienced before, Vivien quickly picked up a decorative object for self-defense and then mentioned that her husband was upstairs. As soon as she entered, the woman commented that the house's wood had been changed, making it feel very warm, and even the wood shavings on the lower level were no longer visible. Vivien didn't understand what the woman was talking about, but seeing how much she appreciated her home, Vivien was happy because she had met a real buyer. Unbeknownst to Vivien, the woman in front of her was also not an ordinary person. If we take a closer look at the woman's appearance, doesn't she look exactly like Charles's wife, Nora? The woman then asked Vivien to pour her a glass of water to taste. While Vivien was getting the water, a deep, bottomless black hole appeared on the back of the woman's head, and the moment Vivien turned around, the mysterious woman had disappeared. The next day, Ben's mistress, Hayden, came to the old house, shouting for Vivien like a madwoman, because she was also pregnant. She hadn't had the abortion and didn't want her future child to be fatherless, but Vivien's not home at the moment, and she doesn't know what Ben's doing. Ben tried his best to calm Hayden's emotions, and Hayden relaxed her guard, but just as they stepped out of the old house, Larry hit Hayden with a shovel, killing her. Ben, enraged, tackled Larry to the ground, but Larry said he was there to help him, because Hayden was pregnant. If Vivien found out the truth, his family would be shattered. Now, Larry had solved this crisis for him, but Ben still couldn't accept that Hayden had died right in front of him. Larry said he would take care of Hayden's body and told Ben not to worry, just not to forget to pay him $1,000. Ben stood frozen in place, shivering with fear. Then Larry took out Ben's shovel and started digging in the garden. As Larry dug deeper, Moira appeared at the window, tears streaming down her face as she watched Larry dig a deep hole. Yes, Moira's body was also buried here. Then Larry buried Hayden's body alongside Moira's. After doing all this, Ben brought in concrete to cover the burial site and turn it into a small tea pavilion. At that moment, Vivien arrived, and they showed happy and content smiles in the tea pavilion. Little did they know that beneath their feet lay two buried bodies. The next day, Vivien told Marcy that in the past 2 weeks, only one woman had come to see the house, but she was scared away by this eerie house before she could even finish her tour. Marcy suggested that since Halloween was just around the corner, decorating the house with some lively and exquisite pumpkins might make the mansion much more popular. That very night, a ruckus outside the door erupted, and Ben quickly went out to check, only to find 2 children throwing eggs at his house. As Halloween approaches, the spectral power of the spirits here becomes even stronger, and the tenants who move into the haunted house end up dying horribly, then transforming into malevolent spirits trapped forever within its walls. Seeing that Halloween was imminent, the family was busy preparing pumpkins. At this moment, Larry found Ben again, demanding the $1,000. If Ben tried to renege, he threatened to dig up Hayden's body from under the gazebo and hand it over to Vivien. Ben was furious. His lover had already been killed by Larry, and now he was still under his threat. Unable to contain himself any longer in the face of Larry's provocative behavior, Ben snatched Larry's pumpkin head. Meanwhile, Vivien had requested professional surveillance equipment from the police. She wanted to use it to observe every corner of the room. The police said that if she encountered danger at night, she could press the emergency button next to her bed, and he would arrive at the mansion as fast as possible. Vivien was overjoyed, thinking her safety was finally ensured. Later, Vivien entered the living room and found Moira preparing pumpkins for Halloween. Moira mentioned that she would leave for a day on Halloween to visit her mother. Vivien suspected nothing. She picked up one of Moira's pumpkins and left. At this time, 2 men outside caught Vivien's attention. They said they loved the grand mansion for its timeless aura. Vivien was delighted. Thinking they were interior designers, the man introduced himself as Chad, and the man beside him as Patrick, his male partner of many years. By now, you might have guessed, they were the previous owners of the haunted house. Many years ago, This young couple was preparing for the upcoming Halloween in their home. Suddenly, Patrick became unusually agitated, expressing his desire for real, genuine love, and his earnest wish to spend his life with Chad. Chad was deeply moved, believing Patrick to be a wonderful man, but after Patrick left, a mysterious rubber man suddenly appeared. Chad thought it was Patrick impersonating Rubber Man and he kept on yammering. The rubber man slowly approached Chad. Suddenly, Patrick returned to the room and watched his lover die in front of him. Time returned to the present, and after the spectral power of Halloween revived, Chad and his partner came to the outside of the ancient mansion they once lived in. Vivien invited them into the room to carve pumpkins. Chad thought this was going to be an unforgettable Halloween. On the other side, Violet sneaked into the basement to find Tate. When Rubber Man appeared again, but Rubber Man didn't hurt Violet. Instead, he took off his mask. Violet found this incredibly thrilling, and Tate, wanting to scare Violet, revealed the entire history of the haunted house. In the early months of 1922, a surgeon named Charles built this mansion, and he used to work in this very basement. Charles was a renowned surgeon who had unfortunately contracted a virus. His wife, Nora, didn't want to live in poverty, so she sought to secure benefits for her husband in secret. Many influencers who met with an unfortunate fate sought out Charles to perform their abortions, day after day. This continued until one day, one of the girls accidentally let the secret slip and told everything about what happened in the basement. That day, a strange man called, and Nora, confused, called out for her young son but received no response. Nora rushed to her son's room, only to discover that her child was gone. The man who called wanted to avenge the influencers he was protecting, so he took away the child of Charles and Moira. The very next day, Charles and his wife received a package from the police, and they found many children's specimens inside the bottle. Charles went mad with grief, and using his years of surgical experience, he tried to bring his dead son back to life. But instead of reviving, the boy became an evil, undead spirit under Charles's operation. Even after the deaths of Charles and his wife, that malevolent spirit still exists and is right in this basement. Violet didn't find this joke funny at all. She didn't believe a word Tate said, so she took Tate out of the basement, wanting to go on a real date. On Halloween night, Adelaide wanted to dress up as a pretty girl, but her mother gave her a skin mask instead and said it suited her better. Adelaide was thrilled with the mask her mother gave her. Meanwhile, under Chad's meticulous decoration, the haunted house became even more terrifying, and Vivien was very displeased with this. Chad had turned their home into this without her consent, but for Chad, who was a malevolent spirit, Halloween was like his rebirth parents. Only on Halloween could the power of the spirits be unleashed, allowing them to come back to life. Chad has taken it upon himself to be the owner of the old mansion, reprimanding Ben for not buying the green apples and even attempting to remove Vivien and Ben from the premises. Vivien became irritable and restless under Chad's provocation, but after Chad and Patrick left, Vivien's stomach began to hurt, and she said it felt like the baby inside her was kicking her. Ben thought this was impossible. Their child was only 2 months old. They then went to the hospital, where the doctor treated Vivien urgently and said it couldn't be the child kicking her because a 2-month-old baby is only the size of a kidney bean. Vivien was very worried about the safety of the baby. The doctor said that maybe she was holding a fart in her stomach causing bloating and abdominal pain, but when the doctor checked the fetal heartbeat for Vivien, she found something abnormal. It didn't look like a 2-month-old fetus at all. Just then, the doctor suddenly stopped moving. They didn't understand what was happening at all. On the other side, Adelaide, wearing the skin mask her mother gave her, was looking for Violet when a group of girls in strange costumes came by and started mocking her. Unable to bear the taunts, Adelaide chased after them, but she had only gone a few steps when a car came straight towards her. The hit sent Adelaide flying, and she lay motionless on the ground while the driver fled the scene. Constance, however, frantically refused the doctor's help, desperately dragging her daughter to the lawn outside the haunted house. But Adelaide still showed no response. Constance was in immense pain. She ultimately couldn't save her only daughter. At the same time, Moira arrived at the hospital looking for her elderly mother, and she seemed to make a decision as she looked at an old woman beside her. Moira slowly walked up to her mother and said that it was all her fault, that her mother had ended up like this because of her. Moira finally makes a big decision. She removes her mother's oxygen mask. At this moment, Moira's mother suddenly appeared behind her and asked Moira to leave this place with her. Then the mother disappeared. Meanwhile, Violet was home alone and in danger, hearing a series of urgent knocks on the door. It was Larry, pressing Ben to pay the $1,000 he owed. Violet was terrified and hurriedly called her father for help. But Ben just told her to lock the door and not to call the police. They would return as quickly as possible. Violet could only stand there, shivering, while Tate, disguised as Rubberman, also appeared beside her, perhaps sensing something. By the time Violet turned her head, Rubberman had already disappeared. Violet then returned to her room, and immediately after, a creepy hand suddenly appeared from under the bed. At that moment, there was a banging noise from the window, and Violet went to check. Finding Tate there to see her, they went down to the basement for their date. Violet said she was almost driven mad by this house, with the constant sound of sirens outside, followed by a madman knocking furiously at the door. Tate tried his best to calm Violet's emotions and then pulled out a rose to give to her. Violet was delighted, saying this was the first time in her life she had received a rose. Not long after, Vivien and Ben rushed back home, and they searched the entire mansion but found that Violet had disappeared. Just then, there was another violent knocking at the door. As Ben opened the door, he found Hayden, who had been killed by Larry, had come back. Ben urged Hayden to leave quickly, or he would make sure she regretted it. Faced with Hayden's provocation, Ben showed a look of disgust, thinking that all this was a plot by Hayden and Larry to get his $1,000. Hayden said she missed his lips and even more, the taste of Ben, and she could no longer restrain her feelings. As soon as the words fell, Hayden spat out blood, and Ben watched, dumbfounded. At that moment, Larry suddenly appeared with a shovel, and Ben was instantly knocked to the ground. Seeing Hayden, revived by the spectral power, Larry was terrified and apologized to her from the bottom of his heart. But after Hayden left, Larry pulled out a lighter, seemingly planning to do something. Then Hayden appeared in the bathtub, but her voice was still heard by the dog outside. Vivien hurried over to check but found that it seemed like someone was in the bathroom. However, when she entered the room, it was already ablaze with fire. At this time, Violet was completely unaware of the paranormal events happening at home and was instead on a date with Tate at the beach. They had already begun to engage in deep conversation, but at this critical moment, Tate stopped. He said he couldn't do it, asserting that his sexual orientation was normal, all because of Violet's father. Violet said she was willing to wait for him, but before they could react, several strange-looking teenagers surrounded them. They seemed to have a deep animosity towards Tate, and all of them had severe wounds, saying they had been waiting for Tate for decades. From their wounds, it was clear these teenagers were no longer alive but spirits revived by the spectral power of Halloween. Violet thought their prank was a bit much, and Tate, knowing these people were the same kind of spirits as him, quickly turned and led Violet away. When they got back home, Violet questioned Tate about why he had such friends. Tate said they were just some high school students who took pleasure in being mean and cruel, and he had been scared by them just now too. At that moment, a series of eerie sounds came from outside the window, and they hurried to look, only to see the same troublesome teens had followed them. Tate was too scared to even lift his feet, but Violet, unaware that they were facing malevolent spirits, went downstairs armed with a weapon, ready to take on all five. Violet warned the delinquent teens that if they didn't leave quickly, she would give them a taste of their own medicine. The delinquent teens quickly turned their hostility towards Violet. Violet was gradually getting the worst of it. She saw one of the boys bleeding from the mouth even as he spoke, and only then did Violet realize these people were not normal. At the crucial moment, Tate appeared and then turned to run. Seeing that Tate had drawn away the numerous spirits, Violet quickly pulled out her cell phone to call the police for help. At that moment, Constance suddenly appeared, and she took Violet to Adelaide's body, saying Adelaide's death was all because of Violet. Adelaide just wanted to dress up as a pretty girl on Halloween, but she was hit by a car while looking for Violet. Meanwhile, in the basement of the haunted house, Ben gradually woke up and found a woman standing beside him. This woman was Nora, the first lady of the mansion, who would not allow any more tragedies to happen in this house. So she freed Ben from his restraints. Then Nora told Ben that he must protect the baby in Vivien's womb, and then she disappeared again. The dead Hayden, now a malevolent spirit, wanted to take revenge on Vivien. She was eager for Vivien to know the truth. Hayden said she had been killed by Ben. Vivien didn't believe what Hayden said and remarked that if she were really dead, she wouldn't be appearing here. At that moment, Hayden noticed Vivien was pregnant, and she too remembered her own child that died in her womb. After saying this, she angrily smashed the family portrait of Ben's family. Then, Hayden picked up a piece of broken glass and said her death was all Ben's fault, and now she wanted to take the baby out of Vivien's womb. Just then, Ben appeared in time, and under Hayden's threat, Ben was forced to tell the truth. His business trip wasn't for seeing a patient but to go to Boston to be with Hayden, who had also been pregnant with his child. And all of it was his lie. Seeing Ben finally confess, Hayden put down the piece of glass she was holding. Immediately afterward, police officer Luke arrived with his gun drawn. Meanwhile, Constance took Violet to her own house and revealed a little secret to her. Constance said that Tate was actually her child, and that he had died a long time ago. But after Tate's death, his spirit lost part of its memory, which led him to believe that he was still alive. Constance asked Violet to keep this secret because Tate was a very sensitive child and lacked courage and strength. Violet was very skeptical. It was impossible for the dead to come back to life. At this point, Constance took out a photograph that was a picture of Tate and Adelaide together. Constance explained that Tate had always thought he was still alive and believed he had psychological issues, so he sought out psychologist Ben for diagnosis. Meanwhile, Tate, pursued by the troublesome teens, was now cornered, not understanding why these people were targeting him. It was then Stephanie who told Tate the truth. These 5 people were all once killed by Tate and were now back for revenge. But Tate, having lost his memory, did not remember them. It turned out that 20 years ago, a shooting incident occurred in a prominent school. 5 students were hiding in the library, discussing where to hide, when the sound of the killer opening the door came from outside. Seeing the door about to be opened, the librarian hurried forward to block the door with her body. Unexpectedly, the person outside suddenly started shooting. The students were terrified and scattered, hiding in corners. Others, hearing the gunfire, dared not move and could only stay where they were, waiting for death to approach. At this moment, a boy decided to go and stop the killer from continuing to kill but also couldn't escape death. Finally, a girl's crying attracted the killer, and the face of the cold-hearted man was revealed. It was Tate. Fast forward 20 years. Having learned all this, Violet hurried home and searched for the Westfield High School massacre. She found that everything Constance had said was true. The high school students she saw last night had actually died 20 years ago. She then searched for information about the killer from that year and discovered it was indeed Tate, whom she deeply loved. This all felt too unreal to Violet. She hurried downstairs to find her mother but found Constance already there. Constance knew Violet had found out about what Tate had done in the past and said this house would make her believe in the existence of spirits. Violet felt she was being driven mad by all this. She told Constance to leave her home immediately. Seeing Violet like this, Constance decided to take her to meet someone. This woman was a well-known medium in the town. Constance believed she might be able to help Violet see the reality. And with the dawn of the second day of Halloween, all the spirits roaming outside would return to the basement of the haunted house. They might not know each other, but the haunted house tightly linked these people who died within its walls together. Violet was on the verge of a breakdown, feeling that the whole world was deceiving her, and thus she thought about ending her own life. Suddenly, Violet snapped back to reality. Her previous suicidal action was just her imagination. At that moment, Tate's voice appeared behind her, but when Violet turned around, she realized it was just a hallucination, and she seriously suspected she was ill. Later, Violet found Leah and poured out everything that had happened to her recently. Now, she couldn't distinguish reality anymore. Leah obviously knew something. She had searched the internet for a kind of revelation. Legend says that in heaven, there is a pregnant woman about to give birth, while a red 7-headed dragon waits eagerly nearby to devour the newborn baby. But the archangel Michael drove the dragon to earth, causing the dragon to harbor resentment and curse women and their descendants with the dragon's roar. And the family of Violet, who moved into the haunted house, would also be caught up in this curse. Violet said she hadn't slept in 2 days and hoped to ask Leah for some medication to treat her sleeplessness. After getting the needed sleeping pills, Violet went to the library where Tate had once killed. The librarian in front of her was Carmichael, a survivor of that massacre, who said that although he had played the hero, his fate was truly tragic. Violet said she knew Tate and that she was his neighbor. She hoped to learn the truth about Tate's killings, but Carmichael still harbored hatred for Tate and was unwilling to say much about him. This trip to the library yielded no valuable information, so Violet could only go back home first. But just then, a strange shadow flashed by. Violet thought Tate was luring her into the basement, so she followed. Soon, bizarre events occurred. In this basement, all the evil spirits who had died appeared. Violet fled in terror. In a daze, she saw herself as if her soul had left her body, struggling to move. But when Violet returned to her room, she found Tate had written "I love you" on the wall. Violet's heart was already on the brink of collapse. Then, she took out the pills Leah had given her and swallowed them all. The pills quickly took effect, but Violet gradually lost consciousness. At that moment, Tate appeared again. He dragged Violet into the bathroom and used cold water to wash her, then tried to scoop out the medication Violet had swallowed with his hand. Violet soon woke up. She looked at Tate, who loved her deeply, and was plunged into profound pain. In the end, she was defeated by love. Meanwhile, Vivien was doing routine care for the baby in her belly when she suddenly noticed a small black claw slowly moving on her belly. Vivien was shocked awake. After realizing it was just a false alarm, she went to the church to find Angela, the doctor who had examined her recently, but Angela seemed to be very guarded against Vivien. Vivien expressed her concern about the results of that examination and hoped to learn the truth from Angela's mouth. Angela said she had quit her job and had been praying ever since. She had seen the unclean thing in Vivien's womb, and that child even had a small hoof. Vivien was baffled. She thought Angela must be having a psychotic episode and turned to leave. On the other side, Constance still could not accept Adelaide's death. She hoped the medium, Billy, could help her call Adelaide's spirit. Billy agreed to conduct a seance for Constance, but during the seance, Constance remembered Tate, who had been shot years ago, many years earlier. After Tate killed several high school students, he was surrounded by armed forces at home. No matter how Constance pleaded, it was futile. Tate, as if possessed by the god of war, was fierce and even assumed a provocative posture. Then he was shot through by countless bullets. The dead Tate turned into an evil spirit trapped in this haunted house, unable to leave. Once, Larry was a tenant in this haunted house, and he had an indescribable relationship with Constance. Indeed, Larry was once Constance's lover, so he was willing to go through fire and water for her. Then, Larry slowly climbed the stairs to the attic. He looked into the dark depths, where a red leather ball rolled towards him, and inside, a boy was tightly locked with chains. This boy was Larry's young son. Due to his congenital deformity and bizarre appearance, he was locked in the attic year-round, never seeing the light of day. Like a kindly old father, Larry soothed his son to sleep, but as soon as the boy closed his eyes, the kind father picked up a pillow next to him and smothered him to death. After this, Larry, as if possessed, doused the entire room with gasoline, not sparing even his only wife and daughter. Then, he set the entire house ablaze with a great fire. Larry escaped from the fire and became what he is today. At this time, Ben and Vivien came to the hospital again for a checkup, both very worried about whether their child was healthy. The doctor carefully reviewed the report and then announced that the child was very healthy and that Vivien was carrying very rare twins. Hearing this news, they were both extremely surprised. Due to the recent bizarre occurrences at home, Vivien and Ben decided to sell the mansion. That day, a buyer from Persia came to view the property, but just a few steps in, Joe was very satisfied with the mansion, especially enchanted by the sexy housekeeper. Vivien says that the house comes with a housekeeper and that Moira has already worked for previous owners. Vivien told Joe that a male couple had once died here, but this made Joe even more interested in the house. Afterward, he left his contact information and departed. Marcy strongly disapproved of Vivien's approach. Just then, Larry slipped in unnoticed, saying he really liked the house, but when Marcy saw Larry's appearance, she quickly pulled out a Barrett hidden in her bosom. Larry said he was here to see the house because he was very interested in this haunted mansion. Not wanting to escalate the situation, Vivien began to show Larry around the mansion. Larry said he really liked the fireplace, but the moment he lit the fire, he revealed a mysterious smile. He expressed a great interest in the house. After a busy day, Vivien felt physically and mentally exhausted by evening, and in a daze. She felt the rubber man was right in front of her, but when she came to her senses, the rubber man had already disappeared. The next day, the family of 3 was having a meal when Vivien mentioned that a man with a fierce face had come to see the house yesterday. Ben immediately felt uneasy because he knew the man Vivien was talking about was Larry. It was only then that Ben realized that perhaps Larry had a deep and complicated connection with this house. At this time, Joe came to visit again, and Moira, not very enthusiastically, welcomed Joe and then took him on a tour of the house's beautiful sights. Faced with such temptation, Joe naturally couldn't resist, and afterward, they went to Violet's room. After they left Violet's room, Ben happened to pass by, and Moira told him that Joe was from Persia and had already decided to buy the mansion. Ben was very happy to hear this, and soon after, Joe left. At this moment, Larry was returning home, but as soon as he entered the room, he found Ben waiting for him. Ben directly asked Larry why he went to see Vivien to inquire about the house, and that he had investigated that everything Larry had said before was a lie. but Larry said he really wanted to buy that haunted house. Ben knew he couldn't afford that mansion. Larry said the mansion had special significance for him and that a mysterious power was drawing him to it. Then, Larry told Ben about the past. It turned out he had been Constance's lover long ago, and he had honestly told his wife that he had fallen in love with someone he shouldn't have. So now he wanted to negotiate a peaceful separation. Who knew his angry wife would set a big fire in the room and die with their son? By the time Larry arrived, his wife and son had been burned to ashes, and he had become the figure he was now. Ben didn't believe anything Larry said. Larry said that was just one of the horrors of that house. It was said that the first owner also died there. What should have been a happy family turned tragic when their child was taken away by someone after an accident and returned in a box. Eventually, the woman, unable to bear the man's incompetence, lost control of her emotions and opened fire, and Vivien, accompanied by Marcy, again took a tour bus to her own house. Looking at the mansion in front of her, Marcy said they must not tell the buyer that this place was a haunted house. Violet was wandering around her own house when an eerie noise suddenly came from the attic above her head. Violet mustered her courage to check it out. A red leather ball rolled towards her from the deep darkness. Suddenly, Violet was terrified, but fortunately, Tate appeared behind her. The chained bow was also scared away by Tate. Violet looked behind her, still unsettled. Feeling like she was about to break down, Tate said that Bo was from the past, a malevolent spirit who had died in this house. The reason Bo appeared before Violet was that she had evolved. Violet was utterly bewildered. Then, Tate found an old photograph in a box, showing the family of the house's original owner. Right after that, a girl in white appeared behind her, but she had vanished by the time Violet opened her eyes. Meanwhile, Larry sneaked into the mansion's basement. Looking at his former lover Constance, she thought Larry was too unlucky. Larry mentioned that Ben's family wanted to sell the haunted house. Constance said that didn't matter, as no one could truly own that kind of haunted mansion. Larry said Vivien had already found a buyer who planned to demolish the mansion and rebuild. Only then did Constance sense trouble, so she hurriedly found Joe to persuade him not to buy the haunted house. Joe said he was set on that house. He wanted to demolish the mansion and turn it into a parking lot. Joe's words sparked a vengeful desire in Constance, so she planned to team up with Moira to deal with Joe. The scene shifts. Moira had already taken Joe to the basement of the haunted house. At that moment, Larry suddenly appeared behind Joe and suffocated him to death. Another murder occurred in the basement, but Vivien and her daughter upstairs didn't hear a thing. Seeing her daughter looking at an old photograph, Vivien quickly approached to ask, but when she saw the woman in the photo, she fell into fear again. Vivien recognized the woman in the photo, and scenes from the past kept emerging in her mind. Vivien felt something was terribly wrong, so she went to Marcy to ask what was happening, certain she had seen Nora before. Yet, despite a century, Nora's appearance had not changed at all, but Marcy thought this was a hallucination Vivien was having due to her pregnancy. Moira also said that folklore suggests everyone has a doppelganger. Vivien was very confused. Perhaps it was indeed a hallucination caused by her pregnancy. Meanwhile, in a room upstairs, Nora was wailing over her missing child, and Hayden slowly appeared behind her. Nora's constant crying was making it impossible for Hayden to rest, but Nora clearly didn't recognize Hayden, who said that they were all the same, trapped in this haunted house after death. For some reason, they were all unable to leave this place. She was not alone because many other malevolent spirits who had died here also couldn't leave, and they had acquired many supernatural abilities. Nora didn't believe what Hayden had said. She still thought she was alive, but Hayden told her to touch the back of her head to understand everything. Nora seemed to remember something, and her emotions became extremely agitated. Immediately after that, Hayden blurted out that Vivien had twins in her belly, and she compelled Nora to supposedly snatch both babies, and then the two of them would split one baby each. Meanwhile, Vivien was alone in the bathroom. She thought she was just too tired recently, which caused her to have hallucinations. But just then, a strange sound came from outside the door, and a red rubber ball rolled to her feet. At that moment, the lights started flickering, and Hayden's figure appeared behind Vivien. In a panic, Vivien could do nothing but scream, and in the end, she could only hide in the bathroom and faint. On the other side, Ben went to the mansion's basement, where he saw Violet holding the red rubber ball and talking to herself. Then, they went to the home office. Ben, a psychiatrist, still couldn't heal his daughter's inner wounds. The disharmony in the parents' marriage also caused a severe deformation in Violet's heart. She believed her mother's recent absent-mindedness was all because of Ben. At this time, Vivien was mentally breaking down. She said she really saw visions. Moira, feeling pity, then told Vivien the mansion was full of malevolent spirits. She hoped Vivien would leave before getting in too deep. Upon hearing this, Vivien wanted to take Violet and leave that night, but just as they got in the car, 2 dead spirits appeared behind them, scaring them into running back into the mansion. Meanwhile, Hayden smiled in the darkness. Everything was under her control. The next day, Ben was furious that Vivien had taken their daughter away without telling him. Even if they were to separate, she shouldn't take their daughter and the unborn children. Vivien's emotions gradually became uncontrollable. She said she saw the spirits in the car last night, only a foot away from her, but Ben thought it was a hallucination caused by Vivien's stress. To prove she really saw the spirits, Vivien called Violet to testify, but Violet lied, saying she saw nothing last night so she could stay in the house and be with Tate. Violet's words made Vivien freeze on the spot. Ben was already very disappointed in Vivien. Meanwhile, Hayden found Tate and said her powers had increased after death, so she wanted to have a relationship with him. Tate said he had already fallen in love and was no longer interested in other women. After saying this, he turned and left. Hayden was left alone, awkwardly cursing on the spot. Vivien found Marcy again and then took the opportunity to steal Marcy's Beretta and hide it under her pillow. Seeing her objective achieved, she said she was feeling unwell and needed to rest. At night, Vivien took out the Beretta hidden under the pillow and started searching the entire house. After making sure there was no danger, Vivien finally relaxed, turned off the light, and prepared to rest. But just then, a figure flashed by, and when Vivien turned on the light, there was nothing. Vivien, not reassured, checked the room again. Then, Rubberman appeared again. Vivien pressed the alarm and pulled out the Beretta. But just then, Ben burst into the room. Luke received the alarm and immediately came to check. Ben came to greet him with injuries, saying it was just a scratch and nothing serious. Vivien had already fallen asleep, and in a daze, she saw Hayden right in front of her, but she was too tired. Faced with her former rival, Vivien was too sleepy to keep her eyes open, but Hayden pressed on. She said she wanted the babies in Vivien's womb, then called the biological father, Rubberman. In the ensuing struggle, Rubberman transformed into Ben's appearance. Vivien was bewildered. She saw a Rubberman attacking her and Hayden there too. Hayden said she wanted her child, and Vivien didn't believe it was a hallucination. Luke also said he didn't see anyone else there. Then, Ben brought 2 psychiatrists to conduct a mental evaluation on Vivien. Vivien didn't resist. Perhaps this was also a good way to temporarily leave the haunted house. The next day, Hayden's sister Marla brought the police to Ben. They were investigating a missing person. It turns out Marla hadn't seen her sister for a long time, so she suspected that Hayden had been killed by Ben, and the police officer was there at her behest. The police said that during the time they received the missing person's call, they had seen Ben digging in the backyard garden and building a gazebo. They suspected that Hayden's disappearance was because she was buried under the gazebo. But just then, the already dead Hayden suddenly appeared in front of them, saying she was safe and sound, and that she loved this beautiful mansion, which would now be her home. Unbeknownst to them, Hayden had already become a malevolent spirit. After Marla left, Hayden kept apologizing to Ben, saying she loved him too much, and that she had even aborted the child so he wouldn't have to worry about it anymore. But a phone call from the doctor completely shattered Ben's last line of defense. The doctor said the twins in Vivien's womb were a case of heteropaternal superfecundation, meaning the 2 children have different biological fathers. This meant Ben was going to be a father to one of them. Hearing this news, Ben felt like he had a green light over his head, and this news was also learned by Constance. Moira said Ben was the father of one of the twins, but she didn't continue about the other child's father. Constance seemed to understand something and hurriedly went to the basement to find Tate. Seeing Tate right in front of him, Constance gets emotional and asks Tate what he's done and then knocks Tate out with a few slaps on the wrist. At this time,
You, for God's sakes, what's wrong with you? Don't you realize what you've done?
Ben had already arrived at his wife's hospital. Dr. Naima said his wife was quite ill. During her hospital stay, Vivien had attacked a nurse and even claimed that she had been intimate with a Rubberman. Then, under Naima's guidance, Ben found Vivien, looking at his deeply loved wife. Ben, holding back his inner pain, confessed his feelings to Vivien. He believed all this was Vivien's fault, that her disloyalty to their marriage had led their family to fall apart, and he definitely would not help her leave this place. Vivien just lay on the hospital bed in silence. After returning home, Hayden found Ben, and then she suggested there might be something secret between Vivien and Luke. Hearing this, Ben suddenly had an epiphany. obviously believing Hayden's insinuations. Then Ben pressed the home alarm, and Luke arrived within 3 seconds. Ben said he already knew everything and hoped Luke would confess the truth. But Luke was a bit confused, obviously not understanding what Ben meant, but he knew the situation seemed a bit ominous. Ben said his wife was carrying twins and that only one of the children was his. Only then did Luke understand that Ben thought he had been cuckolded. He said the other child must be his. Hearing Luke admit this, Ben almost lost it, but Luke said he was infertile, so the child couldn't be his. Ben fell into despair again. Ben found Moira to ask for the truth, but Moira just glanced at him and then turned to leave. And when Moira turned back, she transformed into her older appearance. Seeing this transformed Moira, Ben was completely stunned. At the same time, Constance also learned the truth and asked Billy what would happen if a living person and a malevolent spirit were together, but Billy said that spirits don't have the capability. Constance goes on to ask what happens if a woman gets pregnant. Then Billy mentioned an old legend. After a new pope is chosen, the bells of the Ma family church will ring, and the new pope will be taken to a room called the House of Tears, where there is a box that the pope will open with a key. It is said the box contains a secret about the apocalypse. Constance thought this story was not funny at all. This isn't a TV drama. Billy then got to the point. If a human and a malevolent spirit come together and the human becomes pregnant, it would trigger the apocalypse. This is the root of all evil. Humans must be born of humans, demons of demons, and humans and demons must not be together. Constance couldn't understand Billy's words at all. She thought Billy was full of lies. And Ben found Vivien again and sincerely apologized to her. But by this time, Vivien no longer wanted to see Ben. She said she didn't want to explain any more about this topic, seeing that his wife seemed unaware of what had happened to her. Ben could only confess the truth. He told Vivien that the doctor said she was carrying twins with different fathers, and one of the children was not his. Vivien immediately felt something was wrong because she also didn't know who that rubber man really was. Meanwhile, at a sports park outside, a few boys were playing basketball. One of the boys went to fetch a far-off basketball and accidentally discovered a bisected female corpse, and Larry was watching all of this from a distance. What exactly had happened? Just a few days ago, a patient named Elizabeth found Ben, saying she was in big trouble, but recently, Ben has been so overwhelmed by his wife's betrayal that he really doesn't have the energy to treat anyone else's mental illness. However, he didn't know that the Elizabeth in front of him was not an ordinary person but a victim who had been killed in the haunted house 60 years ago. At that time, Elizabeth was an inconspicuous little actress who wanted to make herself more beautiful, so she sought out David, a dentist living in the haunted house, to fix her teeth. Elizabeth said she didn't have money and asked if he could accept a special arrangement, but David was unmoved and even put a surgical oxygen tank on her. But after injecting the anesthesia, David raped her, while the unconscious Elizabeth knew nothing about it. Just when David was about to treat Elizabeth's teeth, he discovered that Elizabeth was motionless. Only then did David realize that the overdose of anesthesia had killed Elizabeth. David dragged Elizabeth to the basement but ran into a strange man. The man said his name was Charles, a very famous surgeon. He was here to help. Indeed, Charles was the first owner of the house, who, after death, became a malevolent spirit forever trapped here. Then, they took Elizabeth to the operating room and cut her into 88 pieces. To give Elizabeth a permanent smile, Charles turned her into a split personality and then exposed her corpse in the wilderness. Indeed, Elizabeth did become a celebrity after her death. This time, Elizabeth found Ben because she wanted him to help her resolve her long-suppressed emotions. Meanwhile, Hayden lured Constance's young boyfriend, Travis, to the basement to have sex. Afterward, Hayden's emotions became even more unstable. She felt the two of them were quite compatible. Just as they embraced to say goodbye, Hayden stabbed Travis, but under the mansion's magic, Travis instantly turned into a malevolent spirit and was resurrected. Looking at his own body on the ground and feeling that dying might not be so bad. Soon, other spirits who died in the haunted house also appeared. But the next day, the police showed up because they had found Travis's body. Constance, crying, said the man in the photo was her young boyfriend, Travis. The police said they were doing everything to catch the murderer, and Travis's body was found in a city park. They suspected that Travis had been brutally murdered before his body was dumped in the park. At this moment, Constance remembered something she had heard on the news about a young man cut into 8 parts, known as the male Black Dahlia. Could it be Travis? On the other side, a man who claimed to be a truancy officer found Ben, but as soon as Peter entered the room, he found the house exuded a strange aura. Ben apologized, guessing that Peter was here for his daughter, Violet. Peter said Violet had not been to school for 16 days, and although he had been contacting his wife Vivien, all his attempts had been futile. If Violet didn't return to school, the school would file a complaint against Ben in juvenile court. At this time, Violet was happily at home. Ben wants to talk to his daughter. Violet expressed her disappointment in her father's actions. In the end, they each gave a little, and Violet agreed to go with her father to a new school the next day. Meanwhile, Constance found Larry and told him her young boyfriend Travis had died, murdered by someone. Larry was unmoved, making Constance believe that Larry had killed Travis because only Larry knew about her love for Travis. Larry is horrified to see Constance so agitated. He says he was only responsible for moving the body and definitely not the murderer. If she didn't believe him, she could go to the basement and ask Travis himself how he died. After Constance returned home, 2 police officers found her again, but she had no mood to argue with the police. She just wanted to hurry and see Travis, but just then, the kitchen knife in her bag accidentally fell out, and it looked like she now had to go with the police for a while. Tate is a malevolent spirit, and as soon as he put on the hood, a black-clad rubber man appeared. Ben was taking a shower at home, unaware that Rubber Man suddenly appeared behind him, almost catching Ben completely off guard. In the struggle, Tate's hood was accidentally pulled off by Ben, and Ben finally understood everything. One of the fathers of the twins in his wife's womb was Tate. Ben let out a roar of helplessness, but it was all too late. Then, Tate went to the attic to meet Violet and confessed everything to her. Violet finally saw Tate's true face. He was the Rubber Man. Violet took the opportunity to run down from the attic, shouting for her father to help. Tate was immediately frantic, but as Violet ran towards the door to seek help, she discovered that the people outside couldn't see her at all. Tate panicked and shouted for Violet not to run around in the haunted house, but the current Violet couldn't listen. After countless cycles, Violet's heart was nearly breaking. She realized she couldn't escape this large house and could only cry and ask Tate for help. She was young. She didn't want to die. But now it was too late for anything. Then, Tate took Violet to the basement and opened the mysterious passage hidden behind the wooden boards. They twisted and turned until they finally reached their destination. Tate reminded Violet not to be surprised no matter what she saw. Then, to Violet's shock, a corpse appeared before her. Violet was stunned, and only then did she realize she had died the moment she took the pills. Tate hadn't revived her in the bathtub. Now that all the truth was revealed, Violet's heart broke again. She had become a malevolent spirit within the mansion. At this moment, Violet understood that she was truly dead and that Tate had always been protecting her. Tate thinks they can stay happy as they are now in the mansion, but Violet doesn't see any happiness. On the other side, Constance was taken to the police station where the police had thoroughly investigated her identity, suspecting her involvement in multiple missing persons cases. Then they brought out a stack of files, which included photos of her youngest son and the missing reports of Moira and her husband. But Constance had a strong psychological defense, answering the police interrogation without any flaws. Just then, Constance's lawyer arrived in time, and the police had no more means to hold her. After the police left, the lawyer mentioned that the news of the male Black Dahlia was so sensational that it had become nationally known. But now the police didn't want to solve the case but were looking for a scapegoat, and Constance might be that person. At this time, Larry secretly came to the haunted house basement, peeling off the wall as if looking for something. He wrapped up a large knife with blood on it and then went to the police station to confess, claiming that he killed Travis and it had nothing to do with anyone else. Larry's actions greatly puzzled Constance, but she said she knew nothing about it. After Larry was taken into custody, he requested to see Constance one last time. Larry said he did this only to atone for the sins he had committed, but Constance seemed not to want Larry's conscience to be redeemed. She turned away coldly and left. Ben hurriedly drove back home, where Vivien declared she would never enter the haunted house again. Ben said he had packed their luggage and they could leave soon. After saying this, Ben got out of the car to fetch the luggage, but just then, Vivien started to feel a sharp pain in her stomach, as if the baby was about to emerge. Ben called out to Violet to leave this place, but Violet said she didn't want to leave and urged her father to take her mother and leave quickly. She said if they wanted to see her, they could come back anytime. Ben then realized that something seemed very wrong with his daughter. Seeing her father still not leaving, Violet reluctantly told him the truth, but Ben thought Violet was just talking nonsense. Meanwhile, Vivien was about to give birth, and at this critical moment, Constance arrived just in time, but Vivien said the baby was only 6 months old and not yet due. Then Vivien, supported by Constance, stepped into the haunted house again. Ben, dragging Violet, was still heading out but discovered his wife had already entered the room with Constance's help. With the front door tightly closed by Constance, the fate of their family was sealed. Vivien was then forcibly taken to the basement of the haunted house, where Constance wouldn't allow her to go to the hospital, insisting that the baby must be born here. Ben tried to call for help but found that all the phones had lost their signals. Suddenly, there was a series of knocking sounds from outside. Ben hurried to check but saw his car being smashed by 2 children. Seemingly everyone was preventing Ben from seeking help. Just as Ben returned to his wife's side, he saw many people gathered in the basement. Scenes from the past continuously surfaced in Ben's mind, and only then did he realize something was wrong with this house. Before Ben could figure it out, Constance slapped him and said the house was doing its utmost to help her. Vivien reacted violently because she knew these so-called doctors were not alive. But after the doctor administered a sedative to Vivien, she was powerless to struggle and completely became a lamb awaiting slaughter under the surgeon's knife. Not long after, an accident still occurred. The doctor said one of the children was already dead. Ben knew the dead child had to be his, and the doctor took the dead child away. There was still Rubberman's child in Vivien's womb. In just a few seconds, Vivien began to show signs of difficult labor, and everyone was cheering her on. At this critical moment, Vivien gave her last effort, and the child was finally delivered. But Vivien, due to exhaustion, was barely alive, and the child was forcibly taken away by Constance. Moira shed tears of emotion looking at the child. Poor Vivien was about to slip into unconsciousness, and before she could say any final words, she died from excessive blood loss. The doctors who delivered her also disappeared in an instant. Violet felt very guilty about this. She thought it was all because of her that her parents couldn't leave. But just then, Vivien appeared behind Violet. Yes, she had also become a malevolent spirit and now knew everything about the haunted house. This time, the mother and daughter were reunited. The next day, Ben held a funeral for his wife. Then he went to Constance's house intending to take his child, but Constance disagreed with the child returning to the haunted house, telling Ben that the house had a terrible power and the spirits living in it would kill the child. They both knew this well, but Ben was not persuaded by Constance and instead warned her before he took the child and left angrily. Back home, Ben cared for the child like a kindly old father, but the deceased Vivien just stood quietly to the side, and Ben couldn't see her at all. After feeding the child, Ben meticulously arranged all the keys on the table. Looking at his daughter's photo, Ben pulled out a Beretta, preparing for suicide. At this crucial moment, Vivien suddenly appeared. Vivien demanded that Ben take the child and leave, but Ben felt he had no obligation to care for a child that wasn't his. Vivien said it didn't matter who the father was. What mattered was that the child was born from her. So Ben had to act as the father. Reluctantly, Ben agreed to his beloved wife, and they embraced deeply in farewell. But when Ben came to his senses, he realized his wife wasn't there, so he decided to leave quickly, but halfway, Hayden stopped him. At this moment, another twist occurred as a malevolent spirit suddenly appeared behind Ben. The day after the death of the Harmon family, Marcy welcomed new tenants to buy the house. Miguel said they were from Spain, and Marcy praised the history of the haunted house and its very low price. Miguel and his wife were very happy. They were very satisfied with the mansion and puzzled why the price was so much lower than the market rate. Marcy said the transaction had to be transparent, so she disclosed the truth about the death of Ben's family, but this did not cause them to panic. Instead, they became even more interested in the house. Miguel stated that as long as it wasn't a murder in the room, it wouldn't affect his career at all. Then, Marcy continued to persuade, and Miguel immediately decided to buy the place. Their son Gabriel didn't believe that people who died here turned into spirits, and then he began to skateboard recklessly in the haunted house. But this action disturbed the spirits inside, who intentionally made Gabriel fall and created paranormal events. Gabriel was bewildered, but his odd behavior caught his father's attention. Just as Gabriel was about to leave, Violet appeared behind him. At the same time, Police Officer Granger found Constance again, wanting to inquire about the cause of the Harmon family's deaths, but Constance answered Granger's questions smoothly, as if she was completely uninvolved. She said Violet was the mastermind behind the murder of her own parents, and after killing them, she ran away with the newborn child. Granger didn't seem to believe Constance's words, but he could only take his assistant back to the station for now. At this time, Violet appeared in Gabriel's room, saying she was a spirit who lived nearby, but Gabriel tried to drive Violet away. Violet's intimate words to Gabriel made Tate, who was eavesdropping outside, furious. The couple was about to become intimate, but they didn't know two spirits were beside them. Ben looked at the new homeowners in front of him and saw a reflection of his former self. Vivien said they couldn't allow these people to have children in this house, so they planned to take special action. Moira also decided to lend a hand. During the night, Miguel suddenly stood up while asleep and walked to the kitchen with a blank stare, while Ben, as Rubberman, prepared to attack the sleeping Stacy. She didn't understand why Rubberman suddenly appeared and screamed desperately for Miguel's help. In the chaos, the spirits inside the house kept appearing, and even Stacy couldn't escape when she ran to the bathroom. By this time, Miguel had woken up, thinking he was dreaming, so he looked at Elizabeth in front of him. Miguel was instantly stunned. In a daze, he heard Stacy's voice and hurriedly ran towards the basement but was attacked by Ben. At this moment, Vivien hurriedly came to stop their actions. Then, hiding in the corner, Miguel and Stacy were completely terrified. But just then, Ben and Vivien stood up and told Miguel this was their fate. Without time to think, Miguel and Stacy hurriedly escaped into the car and frantically honked the horn to warn their son of danger. While Gabriel was nearly killed by Tate, Violet appeared just in time to prevent the tragedy. Afterward, they fled without even putting on their pants. The next day, Marcy once again posted a for sale sign on the haunted house. Fast forward 3 years, Constance returned home in high spirits, but as soon as she entered the room, she found a trail of blood on the fridge and blood all over the living room. She rushed to her room to check on the situation only to find that the servant of the house had been killed. Beside her, a boy with blood-stained hands sat in a rocking chair, waving at Constance as if boasting about his achievement. This boy was the demonic child born of Vivien. That concludes American Horror Story, Murder House. If you liked it, give a follow.